So welcome everyone. I'm going to share my screen and then give a brief introduction before we get to Hugh's talk. All right, hopefully you can see me and hear me and see my screen. So good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to any of you who might be on the West Coast. Thank you for joining us for our first Innovation Leader Speaker Series event of 2022. We made it through 2020, we made it through 2021, and now here we are in 2022. My name is Carrie Slade, and I'm an assistant professor at the Fox School of Business at Temple University, as well as the assistant academic director of the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Institute, which we call the IEI. Today, we're very excited to welcome Hugh Molotsi to talk to us about developing a culture of innovation, driving growth by empowering employees' ideas. If you love learning about innovation and entrepreneurship topics and you want to advance your career or go in a new direction, you can learn more about these very things that we talk about in these Innovation Leader Speaker Series talks in our master's program for innovation management and entrepreneurship. If you don't want to take, so that's 10 classes. If you think that's a little too much for you, you can also take 3 classes and get a graduate certificate, which again is a great way to improve your innovation and entrepreneurship knowledge beyond these talks that we have here. I'm happy to talk with anyone, so you can chat me or email me if you want to talk about that. I want to make sure I thank our sponsors for these events: Fox's Center for Student Professional Development, the Product Development and Management Association, the Innovation Research Interchange, and Technically Philly. Thank you so much for everyone's support. And a special welcome to any PDMA or IRI members on the call today. So at the IEI, we have a lot of ways to get involved. If you're looking to get involved with students or ventures, you can scan this code here to get on our mailing list for opportunities. And we thank everyone very much who's helped out so far. And one of the things that we actually need volunteers for right now is our Be Your Own Boss Bowl. This is our largest business competition at the IEI. And what we do is when we get all the submissions, we send them out to reviewers who then score the submissions, and that's how we determine who are our finalists for the submissions. We also pair each team with a mentor, so you'll mentor the team over probably about 2 months to help them with this competition submission. So if you're interested in either roles, either as a mentor or a reviewer, again, get in touch with me or fill out that form that was on the prior slide. Okay, so now I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker today. Hugh Molotsi is the founder and CEO of Ujamaa, the makers of Soko, a farmer's market app. Hugh is a seasoned product and technology leader with over 30 years of experience developing global solutions and developing disruptive products. He had a 22-year career at Intuit, which is a tech company that specializes in financial software, where his last position was engineering fellow and vice president of innovation. He also led Intuit Labs' incubation team. In 2011, Hugh became the first recipient of Intuit's Founders Innovation Award for his contributions on Intuit payments. Hugh is the co-author of The Entrepreneur's Journey, a book on how to develop a culture of innovation in large companies. So if you want to learn more about the topics he's talking about today, we highly recommend you check out that book. All right, that is all I have for you today. So Hugh, thank you so much for joining us, and I will turn it over to you. I'm really excited to hear from you.
Thanks so much, Carrie, and hello, everybody. It's a great honor to speak to you today, and Happy New Year to everyone. I'll just take a second to share my screen. Okay, thumbs up that that's working.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, great. So yes, so today I was going to talk to you about a culture, developing a culture of innovation, a topic I'm very passionate about. But I thought I'd first give you just a quick background about who I am. So, you know, Carrie did mention a little bit of my story. But if going a little bit further back, I was born and grew up in Zambia, which is a country in Central Africa. And this is a photo of me with my mom when I was a kid. And you can see I'm dating myself because that car in the background was not an antique when this picture was taken. This next photo is of my national registration card in Zambia. So this is like a rite of passage into adulthood. Everybody gets a registration card when they turn 16. So this is what I look like shortly before I came to the US. So I came to the States to college and I studied computer engineering. Went to actually did my undergrad at the University of Southern Mississippi. There's a picture from that graduation. And then I went to Santa Clara where I was a teaching assistant and I got my master's there. And that's how I ended up in Silicon Valley. As Carrie mentioned, I spent most of my career at Intuit. So this is a picture of my first Intuit badge. And I like to share it because as a cautionary tale to everybody to take better care of yourselves. Otherwise, this is what you end up looking like if you don't. But I had a really great run at Intuit. When I joined, it was a fairly small company. I started off working in the small business group, working on QuickBooks products. But I quickly discovered that I enjoyed working on new products. And I sort of developed this niche as the new products guy. And so I helped launch several new products for the company, many of them that didn't pan out, but there were a few notable successes. And so as Carrie mentioned, in 2011, I was given an award for having helped birth Intuit's payments business, which is over $1 billion business today. So this is a photo of me with Scott Cook, who's the Intuit founder, and Brad Smith, who was the CEO at the time. I left Intuit at the end of 2015, and this last picture is of me with my family. One of the things I'm doing now is I have my startup pajama, and we're wearing our pajama shirts. So that's just a little bit about my life in pictures. But the talk today, I want to start off with what some of you might consider a provocative statement, that the biggest underutilized assets in most companies are the ideas in the employees' heads. So why do I say that? Well, it's because of something we call the insight decision divide. And what I mean by that is if you go to most companies, frontline employees, they spend most of their day working on products or servicing customers. And because of that, they're bombarded with insights on how the product could work better or how to serve customers better. But in most companies, frontline employees don't get to make those decisions. Those decisions are made by senior executives. But how do senior executives spend most of their day? Well, typically in meetings with other senior executives. And so there's this divide between where insights are happening and where decisions are being made. And because of that, a lot of good ideas are lost. And so one missed opportunity that's quite famous is the story of Steve Wozniak. So Steve Wozniak, as you may know him, he's one of the co-founders of Apple. But before Apple, he was an engineer at Hewlett-Packard. And he had actually been tinkering around and built a prototype of a personal computer. And he begged HP 5 times to turn this into a product. But HP management turned him down. And eventually, he met Steve Jobs, and you probably know the rest of the history. And of course, Apple eventually became the behemoth it is today. But basically, HP missed out on this great idea, this great opportunity that one of the employees had brought to them. But this doesn't have to always be the case. So Google is a company that early on decided that employees have great ideas and they want to take advantage of them. And so they have a program to make sure employees can spend time on their own ideas. And so this is the story of Paul Buchheit. He had been working on a project called Google Groups. And after the project wrapped up, he used some of the Groups code to build a Gmail prototype in one day. And he started sharing it with his colleagues. And of course, the rest is history. Today, Gmail is the most widely used email program in the world, with over 1 billion active users. And so what the most innovative companies have learned is that they should empower their employees to work on their own ideas. And so my former Intuit colleague, Jeff Zayas, and I, we wrote this book, The Entrepreneur's Journey, to catalog best practices in developing a culture of innovation, one where employees are empowered to drive growth. And in this book, we captured lessons from our own experiences leading innovation at Intuit, and also lessons we learned from innovation leaders at other companies. And so to build such a culture, we developed this entrepreneurship empowerment model. The model consists of giving employees time and freedom, deploying design thinking, encouraging open collaboration, fostering an experimentation practice, aligning the organization for yes, and finally, assigning a dedicated team to foster this culture. So I'll talk about each of these in a little more detail. So first, let me talk to you about time and freedom. So employees are given self-directed time carved out from their day jobs to work on their own projects. For employees to be able to work on their own ideas, they need to have time set aside to work on them. No matter how great an idea is, if an employee's time is fully consumed by their assigned work, they won't be able to move that idea forward. Freedom is giving employees the autonomy to choose what projects to work on in this self-directed time. It's the air cover they have, so a manager doesn't look over their shoulders one day when they're at the computer and chastise them for not working on an assigned project. So at Intuit, we have a program called Unstructured Time, and this provides employees time to tap into their passion to drive growth. And so let me share with you one of the success stories we had with Unstructured Time. So one of Intuit's big businesses is TurboTax. Hopefully many of you are users of it. It's the leading solution for preparing your own tax returns. And so two employees here, Amir and Carol, they had this idea that people might want to prepare their taxes on their phones. Now, this was in the early days of smartphones. And to most people, myself included, it seemed like a pretty ludicrous idea because, you know, phones are small and who would want to do their taxes on their phone? But Carol and Amir had this insight. Smartphones have cameras, and if users could take pictures of their tax forms, it would greatly simplify the process, especially for simple returns. So armed with their unstructured time, Carol and Amir started building prototypes of a mobile tax app. They ran tests with customers, and the work created some breakthroughs in understanding what customers wanted. Eventually, their project did get funded and resulted in the release of a TurboTax mobile app, initially just in California, but eventually it was released countrywide. And because Intuit was first to market with a mobile solution, Intuit was able to extend their dominance in the segment by integrating mobile into the tax filing experience. So Unstructured Time allowed them to work on this crazy idea and make it a reality. And in fact, Amir, one of his quotes, he says, "You can't argue with working code. It becomes your talking piece." But another example I'll give is from a different company, Atlassian. They build tools for developers. Now, what Atlassian does is they have every quarter something they call Ship It Days, where they basically shut down the company for 24 hours. And in this day, they tell their employees, you can work on whatever you want to work on, assemble your team, and use that 24 hours. And in fact, Atlassian employees are encouraged to do something other than their regular job. They want people to be bold, adventurous, and solve a big problem creatively. So one of the results of Ship It Days was this team, and they came up with this idea for something they call Jira Service Desk. So Jira was a tool that development teams use to track issues. Their ideas was that, hey, they could use the same tool and give it to call centers as a way to track issues there. And so they basically hacked together a solution in this one day and demoed it, and the company decided, yes, we're going to productize it. And so Jira Service Desk became the fastest growing product that Atlassian has ever had. So that's time and freedom. Let me talk to you about experimentation. In an experimentation culture, employees are provided the tools and infrastructure to test their ideas. Decisions are made with data instead of opinions. And instead of arguing over ideas, employees run experiments to measure which idea has the most merit. In fact, when you make decisions by experimentation, the best ideas win. And so speaking of this experimentation mindset, it's really exemplified in the book, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. Many of you may have read the book. You know, Eric has an interesting backstory. When he graduated from college, he didn't go into a regular corporate company. He went straight into the startup world. And so he got to experience startup failure and startup success. And he had this insight that most people think successful startups are the ones with good ideas and unsuccessful startups are the ones with bad ideas. But he said that actually that's wrong. The successful startups are the ones with a better process. So that seemed like an odd thing to say because you wouldn't normally put process and startup in the same sentence. But this model you see here on the right side explains what he meant by that. What he said is that, you know, every startup starts with an idea. They build it, they then deploy it to customers. And based on what they learn, they get insights on how to improve the idea. Now, a startup that doesn't have a good process, they spend all their time building the idea so that by the time it comes to market, they've expended all their resources. And if the idea fails in market, the startup fails because they have no more money, no more time to continue. But startups that have a good process, they actually build quickly, they deploy to customers, they learn, and then that gives them the insights on improvements and changes to make. And they go through this build, measure, learn loop multiple times very quickly, eventually getting to that winning idea and that winning product in market. And so the lean startup methodology is all about how to go through a build, measure, learn loop quickly so that you can increase your chances of success as a startup team. And of course, one of the things that Eric also learned in writing this book was that this notion of this lean startup model was not just for startups, but was for large companies, government organizations, nonprofits, anybody who's working on an idea that has a high degree of uncertainty. Now, one of the exemplars when it comes to experimentation is Google. They've been a leader in using experiments to constantly improve their search engine algorithms. One of the improvements is called Google Panda, and it's named after Navneet Panda, who was one of the engineers who helped develop this algorithm. So Google, as some of you may know, their original algorithm was called PageRank, which ranked pages by how many other pages linked to that page. Now, before Panda, people had learned how to game the system by building essentially link farms to get their low quality websites, which typically had lots of spammy ads to show up very high in search results. So Panda worked by evaluating whole websites instead of just a single page. And on release in 2011, search improved dramatically for everybody as spammy websites no longer featured prominently on search results. And through experimentation, Google has continued to improve the Panda algorithm. Now, next I'll talk about design thinking. Now, employees use design thinking principles to be effective innovators. And I don't need to tell you that these principles apply to all kinds of problems, not just customer-facing problems. Now at Intuit, we call our version of design thinking design for delight. The three principles are deep customer empathy, go broad to go narrow, and rapid experimentation with customers. With deep customer empathy, our goal is to understand our customers better than they understand themselves. We achieve this empathy by spending lots of time observing customers in their habitat as they go about their work and their home lives. With go broad to go narrow, we know to get to one great idea, you have to think of several dozen ideas. Often your best idea will be a synthesis of many ideas. And finally, with experimentation, which we spoke about earlier, rather than starting with a perfect plan, we build something quickly and learn from it. And then we iterate and improve, eventually getting to a delightful product. Now, one of my favorite Design for Delight stories is from actually Kaiser Permanente, a hospital system. In their case, they were trying to reimagine how they could improve both the productivity and quality of care. So Kaiser had a design thinking team, and one of the things they did is studied how nurses interacted with patients and each other. And they observed in a practice a number of behaviors that represented key opportunities for improvement. One opportunity was shift changes. Shift changes were typically slow and left room for lots of errors. They considered a multitude of different possible approaches. They ran experiments and landed on some new shift changes principles and a brand new process. The results were amazing. The new shift change process cut the time from 40 minutes to 12 minutes. But even more critically, the team reduced errors during information transfer, thereby increasing patient confidence. Next, I'll talk about open collaboration. Open collaboration encourages employees to collaborate with each other, with customers, vendors, and partners over organizational and geographic boundaries. You see, you never know who will provide that one missing ingredient that'll help turn an idea into a delightful reality. So some of you may know the story of how 3M Post-it notes came to be. So at 3M, scientists regularly present at seminars across the company to share their latest inventions in the hope that a product developer will see an opportunity to solve a customer need with that invention. So Spencer Silver was a scientist who accidentally developed a low-tech, reusable, pressure-sensitive adhesive, but he was stymied by how to apply this unique invention. Now, Art Fry was one of these product developers who attended one of Spencer's seminars, and he got this idea for a sticky bookmark, because Art Fry would go to church, he would sing in the choir, and he would put bookmarks for the different hymns they were going to sing. But when flipping through the pages, the bookmarks would fall, and that would frustrate him. And he thought, wow, this sticky adhesive would be a great solution to have sticky bookmarks. Well, anyway, eventually, after lots of iteration, Post-it notes were born. And now, of course, it's hard to go to an office and not see Post-it notes somewhere. And then let me talk about having a dedicated innovation team. To sustain a culture of innovation, employees must be supported by a dedicated team who provide the tools, mindset, and guidance needed to accelerate innovation progress. These dedicated capacity builders will become powerful tuners and amplifiers for a thriving culture of innovation. And I really like this quote from Peter Drucker. He says, only 3 things happen naturally in organizations: friction, confusion, and underperformance. Everything else requires leadership. So of course, the same is true when it comes to innovation and maintaining a culture of innovation. Here's an example of the work that a dedicated innovation team can do. So if at Google, they have something called the Garage. It's a lab set up for employees to use during their Google's 20% time, for employees to basically express their creativity. The lab is absolutely packed with equipment from 3D printers to shop vacs to sewing machines to a CNC milling machine. And employees can come and take classes on how to use the equipment. But for the Garage to operate, it requires full-time employees to manage and maintain and teach the classes. Okay, my last principle is align for yes. So when an organization is aligned for yes, entrepreneurs are provided the funding, resources, and organizational support they need to succeed. Functional groups become partners in innovation instead of roadblocks that you have to overcome. Now, while most people think innovators have to figure out how to work around the company's lawyers, compliance officers, security, privacy, etc., it turns out those very organizations can be an innovator's best friend. And let me give you an example of Lending Club. So for those of you who might not familiar with Lending Club, they've been a leading innovator in the marketplace lending space with the mission to transform the banking system to make credit more affordable and investing more rewarding. Now, the credit marketplace is highly regulated, requiring strict compliance as they create these transformative products. Now, Lending Club, they assembled a cross-functional team of lean startup teams. So it was not just product people, but they had lawyers, they had compliance officers, they had HR, they had people from different functions. And they not only improved the quality, but they improved the speed of innovation and made for a much more enjoyable work experience. And one of the more interesting things that happened was the role of a compliance officer. So the compliance officer was often busting myths, because you'd have an engineer say, well, we can't do, somebody would do a brainstorm and somebody say, oh, we can't do that. That wouldn't be allowed. And often a compliance officer would say, actually, no, that's not true. Or there would be some cases where they would say, well, no, you can't do that, but you could achieve the same objective by doing something slightly different. And so in this way, you have a much more enjoyable working experience. You're not having these enemies or enemy organizations in the company that you have to work around. And in fact, like I said, they'll actually help you get to solutions that will work. In a culture of innovation, in an innovative company, innovation is everybody's job. And I'm talking about HR, legal, IT. Nobody gets to say, no, I don't innovate. And in fact, if you think about it, the bottom line, helping a company grow, be more profitable, that should be the first goal of every person in the company. And here's a quote from Brad Smith, who's Intuit's former CEO. And he was talking about the role of functions. He says, our job is not to put barriers up and tell you why you can't. The job of all functions is to find a way to get to yes, and to do it with speed as the currency. So in summary, to bridge the inside decision divide, you should empower your employees to work on their own ideas. And with that, I want to say thank you for your time. And I guess now we can answer any questions.
All right, great. Let's get to questions. So feel free to put them in the chat and or raise your hand. To make it a little more interactive, I will call on you to ask your question, but if you don't want me to, just remain silent and then I'll ask your question for you. Let's see, we'll give people a minute to think of questions. Hugh, can I start you off? Coming from Intuit and then becoming an entrepreneur, can you talk a little bit about that journey? What were some things that maybe were unexpected for you that you thought you knew how to do well, but then becoming the CEO of your own company, was a little more complex than you imagined? Can you talk about that process a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I think some of the differences are obvious to people. When you are working in a startup, you don't have the support of a big organization. And so that is the big pro of innovating in a large company. But of course, when you're in a startup at the same time, you don't have so many people that you have to get buy-in from, and you can move much faster. There isn't the risk that you'll do something to damage a valuable brand. And so again, that's sort of an obvious pro about being in a startup. But I would say to you that, I think a couple of things that I learned along the way, which, I'd say were maybe even more challenging than I anticipated. I think that in a startup, especially if you're a CEO, your number one job is to raise money. And one of the big challenges is how you allocate your time between fundraising and actually working on your startup, building product, acquiring customers. And I've found that some of the successful founders, surprisingly, their fundraising to product balance is super high. Like, they spend 90%, sometimes even 100% of months just working on fundraising. And so that's quite a sobering thing, especially for someone like me who's really a product person. I love product problems. I love working on product, to understand that, you have to spend lots and lots of time away from product. So of course, that's something you typically don't have to think about if you are working inside a large company. And then I would also say, the team building piece of it is also really important. At Intuit, we have great employees. And so typically the people working around you are super smart, super helpful. When you're in a startup, it can feel very isolating, and finding people to come and work with you is a real challenge as well. So, those are some of the, some of my learning in terms of what it's been like before and after.
That's great. Thank you. I did get some questions. Arda, I'll give you a chance. Arda or Peggy, if you would like to unmute, you can and ask your question. But if not, I'll ask it for you.
Oh, I'll ask my question. Hi, how are you? Thank you, Hugh, for coming and speaking with us today. I guess my question is in your experience, when you were presenting your ideas, was the environment always conducive, or how did you handle it if your ideas were not well received?
Yeah, thanks, Peggy. Yeah, this has been part of the journey about being an effective innovation leader. Certainly early on at Intuit, we coming up with ideas, especially provocative ideas that were seen as dangerous, definitely met a lot of resistance. And in fact, you mentioned I got this big award for helping start Intuit's payments business. The actual building of that first payment product was actually super simple, but the thing that was very painful and hard was dealing with all the organizational resistance along the way. And so that really informed a lot of what we ended up learning was the right way to tune the culture. And really what it comes down to is, we use the word experiment a lot. It ends up helping avoid a lot of problems when you explain to people, hey, I've got this idea, we're going to run an experiment. Again, we're not going to blast it to 1 million people. We might find a dozen people, maybe a few dozen people to try it. We'll learn. People will say, oh, here are all the things that can go wrong, and say, oh, we'll run the experiment and see what happens. So using that framing often helps a lot get people past their objections. And also, we say to people, we do need to be a culture that experiments. If we're going to be able to innovate, we can't just say, no, you can't do anything. And so that's, again, where the partnership with functions becomes really helpful. We did have at one point a difficult relationship with our legal team, but it ended up becoming really an awesome relationship in the end, because we started to partner. And so part of the partnering is developing a checklist to say, okay, if you are running an experiment, here's what legal says, all the things you need to check off to make sure that the experiment is kosher. And if any of these things don't fit, then come and talk to us and let's figure out how to make it work. But those are the kinds of things. Again, I encourage people, if you have an idea and it's meeting resistance, just say, hey, I just want to run the experiment, and that can go a long way.
Thank you so much.
Sure, you're welcome. Great
advice. Arda, I'm going to take that as you want me to ask your question for you, but feel free to jump in if not. Arda is asking, Hugh, were there any rock bottom moments in your journey, somewhere where you were almost about to give up? I guess either before Intuit, or post Intuit.
Yeah, so I tell this story in the book about when I was working on payments. So in many ways, payments is in some ways a capstone to my career, but it did have some dark moments in it because of the resistance. But the story I tell is that I had just come back from a vacation in Europe with my girlfriend, and it ended up being a disaster because we broke up while on vacation. So I was in this very sad emotional state, and I had in this team we were working on payments. I had been assigned a documentation writer to work with us, and what I'd found what frustrating was every meeting, instead of helping, she was just putting up roadblocks. And so I thought, okay, well, let me go and talk to her manager, and maybe she can give me advice on how I can get her to be more helpful. And so I go into this manager's office, and as it turns out, this manager was actually the one who had been directing her employee to basically spanner the process. And so she just lit into me. She said, oh, this is a terrible idea, this thing you're working on. It's going to be bad for the company. You know, at the time, Intuit was primarily a desktop company. So she was just concerned that we knew nothing about payments. You know, payments can get messy. You know, there can be a dispute between a customer and a merchant, and they're going to call us, and what are we going to do? You know, and some of her concerns were valid concerns. They weren't out of left field. But anyway, she just, she hammered me with all of this, and I actually wasn't ready. I thought she was going to be helpful. I wasn't ready to get essentially railed at. And so I remember leaving her office proud that I didn't cry, but I did go quickly to the parking lot where I did cry. So that was a low moment, but obviously, you know, I was able to still make it happen, and eventually did release, you know, that first payments product.
That's good, thanks. I'm sure we've all been there where there's a confluence of personal and work factors coming together to make a perfect bad day. All right, great. Liz has a question. I'm going to read it for her. Is it easier to have a culture of innovation when the employees are diverse with varied background? Why or why not?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I would say, you know, yes, diversity is really helpful for the innovation process, because you want those different perspectives. You know, so one of the stories I like to share was one of the other products I worked on was called QuickBooks Simple. It was a simpler version of QuickBooks the QuickBooks desktop product that we developed, and we had a very diverse team working on it. But we were struggling for a while on how to come up with a very simple concept to help people understand bookkeeping, because that ultimately is the challenge: how to create a bookkeeping product that anybody can use. And most people, you know, when it comes to accounting, they know nothing or very little, and they very quickly get intimidated when you start to throw accounting terms. So we wanted to, you know, as much as possible, obfuscate that from folks. And I remember being in a brainstorming meeting where we had this QA engineer. She was originally from China, and she blurted out, "It's money in and money out." And that ended up being like this breakthrough concept of how to think about and organize the way we design the product. And it wouldn't have happened if we had all been, you know, product managers, or all been engineers, or all been a certain type of person. It was really that diversity that I felt like really helped make that team and that product successful.
Awesome, thanks. Greg, do you want to ask your question, or would you like me to ask it for you? All right, he says go ahead. And I had a question about this a little bit too. So I think this is what Greg is getting at. His question is, the time that's used for creative thinking and problem solving, is that included in organizational budgets? And do they do the math on this? Like Google has 20%, they take that 20%, they cost it, and they try to figure out if they're getting 20% worth of projects back. So how does that time, that free time, allotted for in budgeting?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've seen many companies actually do that, you know, budgeting and costing exercise. Or, you know, really where the rubber hits the road is when you are planning projects, just factoring in that employees are going to be going to have this unstructured time or 20% time that they have this self-directed time. But what I also tell people is that at the end of the day, it's really more of a philosophical thing. And what I mean by that, I'd used the term air cover before, just this notion that somebody actually can be working on a project that was not assigned to them. And as a practical matter, often you'll find it's not that, oh, I use 4 hours or 8 hours a week, every week, regularly to work on my own ideas. What we found to be more practical is that somebody may, after 3 months, say, okay, now I'm going to spend this next week working on this particular idea that I have. And usually that becomes a conversation with a manager, just like you'd have a conversation about when you're going to take vacation. So really it's that philosophical thing of, yes, we as a company support and applaud people who are going to be working on their own ideas.
All right, great, cool, thank you. All right, more questions here. John Burt, would you like to ask your question or would you like me to?
Yeah, be happy to. Hey, Hugh, nice to see you again. So question about interviewing and interviewing for innovation. Do you have any favorite questions you like to use when, selecting your team, characteristics, so that you have, a team that really thrives in this innovation space?
Yeah, well, look, full disclosure, John Bird and I worked together into it. And John is awesome. His team had the best engagement scores of any team at the company because he's just an awesome manager. So it doesn't surprise me he's asking about hiring for the team. John, I'm not sure I have any secret great nuggets. I do think that people who are if you're asking specifically about, let's say, innovation leaders, I think there are people who tend to be very excited about supporting other people and helping other people proceed versus maybe being overly focused on their own ideas. So, a term that Jeff Zayas liked to use was capacity builders. They make great coaches. They just enjoy seeing other people thriving. I think that's a big part of it. I think the mistake some people think is that, this is the person who's going to come up with all the great ideas. And that actually is not the role of an innovation leader. You have to assume the idea is actually there in employees' heads. It's just really about who's going to cultivate the culture so that those ideas start to come out, if that makes sense.
That's awesome. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you, John. And we have Jeff Rowan next. Would you like to ask your question or you want me to do it for you?
Sure, I can ask it.
Great, thanks.
In an organization that's trying to kind of make that shift to bridging that insight divide, any tips or tricks on how to really get started or kind of begin that journey?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jeff. Yeah, it's what I tell people, one of the easiest ways to start is with a hackathon or an ideathon or just an event where you could say, we're going to spend 2 hours, half a day, or a full day. Think about Atlassian's Ship It Days. You can start, you don't even have to commit to doing it on a regular basis. And again, you don't necessarily have to commit to 24 hours. Usually something that, let's say, is on a Friday afternoon, is probably not too hard to get companies to buy into. But that's a way to start. It's a way to really start to flex this muscle of, okay, employees, we've got this time. It's not about the work that you've been assigned. It's about things that have been on your mind, ideas you have, maybe things that have been bugging you. I was surprised with one startup that I was advising. They'd been around for only 2 years at the time, and they already had legacy problems, which just blew my mind. At Intuit, we had legacy problems, but we've been around 30 years. But it was funny how quickly legacy issues start to prop up. but because they were so busy, nobody was working on those. And so when they did their first sort of hackathon, what they found was that so many issues got resolved in just half a day, because all it took was just giving people freedom to say, okay, what are the things that you want to address? And so much got done. And so it was a big validation of the approach to where the company said, yeah, well, no, we're going to do this on a regular basis.
Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome.
Well, very cool. Odalis, I like your question. Would you like to ask it, or you want me to?
Yeah, I can go. So is there like a particular time recommended in which like employees will be more creative within their brainstorming time, either like scientifically proven or what you have observed?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if I have a great answer for that. I mean, what I'll tell you in Intuit's journey, when we introduced Unstructured Time, we also introduced a no meetings Friday, because one of the challenges we had at Intuit was just we had just too many meetings. So people would always be frustrated that there's no time to actually get any work done. So we had no meetings Friday, but in a way, in hindsight, it was a little bit unfortunate that we introduced both notions together, because people assume, okay, Friday is the day I use my unstructured time. And as it turned out, it's not a one size fits all thing. As I mentioned earlier, the most practical usage we found is where people just save up the time and then take an extended time, like I said, a week or 3 days, whatever, to work on an idea. Because a lot of things, that ideas you have don't necessarily lend themselves to working on it, just a bit at a time. So, but you asked about being creative with their brainstorming. I don't know the answer to that. I suspect, again, it's not a one size fits all. I think some people are morning people, some people are not. But what I will say is something that we do talk about in the book, and it's on my blog as well. I talk about this process we call 7 to get to 1, which is, my preferred approach to brainstorming. And just to tell you what that is very quickly, is that if you're trying to solicit ideas to solve a problem, what you do is you give everybody homework to say, okay, we're going to meet on a certain day, but when you come to that meeting, I want you to come up with 7 different approaches on how to solve that problem. And so at the meeting, we will use the time to then review what people came up with. And I found this to be superior than your traditional brainstorming, just because, in a typical brainstorming, you'll find, 2 or 3 people dominate the conversation, and also groupthink can happen very quickly. But with this 7 to get to 1, if everybody's done their homework, you get all these very interesting ideas. The 7, by the way, is intentional. Why 7? Because a lot of times if you're trying to solve a problem, there are usually maybe 3 or 4 obvious solutions that will come to you. Then you have to really think hard to, okay, how am I going to get to 7? And as it turns out, often the most creative ideas are the ones that came to you later, the ones that were out of the box, to say. And then when you come together, that introduces an opportunity to then have synthesis, because as everybody shares their ideas, then people can start to say, okay, I liked, Peggy's idea about this part, and I liked Catherine's piece, and then we can combine the 2 of those into the idea, and that's what we work on. So, anyway, that's my long-winded response to your question. But brainstorming it's definitely important to think about how do you make sure you are you have a process where everybody can contribute and that it doesn't get dominated by just a few loud voices.
Yeah, that's
Thank you.
awesome. And we do have a class, creative thinking, creative problem solving, so you can learn some of those techniques, whether from Hugh's book or from our classes. All right, we've got a couple more questions left. And then for those of you looking for the QR code, we will be showing that after the questions. So this is from Rex. Rex, would you like to ask your question or would you like me to?
Sure. I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Hugh, I got your book here.
Oh, wow.
Was able to see you in the Lean Startup Conference. I think it was 2018. I think I even got Jeff's signature in here. I don't know what happened. I don't know if I wasn't able to get a hold of you or whatever for your signature, but anyways.
No, that's great. I think that you got the more valuable signature if you ever have to sign it one day.
No, it's great. It's a great experience. Yeah, so I work at the Boeing Company, and it's a little different products than software products. But we do have people coming up with ideas. I've been a part of hackathons that we've done internally, just by like a ragtag group of people that are interested in it, just started doing it, and is amazing what people come up with, and they're excited to do it. Some people spend their own time, just like take vacation so they can spend like 3 days at a hackathon. It's crazy, but a lot of times it's people charge to training overhead or something like that. They figure out charging. But I wanted to know what your experience was in companies that it's not like people are going to come up with a new product, but they're going to come up with new ways to do a process, or there is a lot of software that supports the building of the product. And when we did a hackathon with the factory people and software people getting together, factory people are trying to look up information all the time, and it usually just needed something that kind of consolidated all their different apps and information into one place so they could find what they needed. And it was a great success. But I want to know what your experience was with that.
Yeah, it's I think similar to what you just expressed, that so sometimes we go into companies, we lead these lean startup workshops, which can be 2 or 3 days, and the whole goal of a workshop is it's hands-on. It's not lecture. We actually have people come up with the ideas, build experiments, and then actually deploy those experiments to customers. There's always that moment of disbelief, like, what, I'm actually going to talk to a customer? Says, yes, that's what we're doing. But anyway, in that process, I've found, and this is not intuitive, but that probably the most valuable part of the workshop is the fact that you have people from different functions working together on teams. Because in their typical day job, they don't talk to each other. And so, exactly. I'd mentioned the lending club and all the myth busting. Somebody will say, we can't do X. And the person's right there to say, no, we can. Or another company I worked with, the issue was with procurement, where they were saying, it takes months to get something approved. And there was somebody from the procurement department in the team. And so it led to a little bit of a heated conversation because they felt defensive, but what ended up being a productive conversation, because ultimately it was like, well, why don't you just come and talk to me and I'll help make sure this gets through faster. We can get this done in a couple of days. And so those type of breakthroughs happen. And I've just found that, getting these cross-functional teams together, that just in of itself is pure gold.
Yeah, I totally agree that we had that experience. People love just working on a small team with people from all over the company that they just met with totally different functions, and they try to solve a problem and they learn all kinds of things about, what other people do in the company. And it's really fun. So yeah, all for it. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Rex.
Great, thanks, Rex. Bharat, would you like to ask your question? I see you've come on screen, so hopefully that means you're going to ask it.
Yeah. Great presentation. I'm trying to be a tools guy. So, my question is, your process of 6 steps or something, and in the hybrid or remote work environment, do you see any tools which can really help to create this collaboration or end-to-end process, which can start the intrapreneurial journey and take it to the conclusion, because we have a lot of fragmented tools now. You can use Slack for one thing, you can use Trello for something, you can use Miro for something, and all of that. But is there an end-to-end tool which, or you should create one which can help build this whole ecosystem? I'm an entrepreneur, so I always want to do something. I'm not an intrapreneur, I'm an entrepreneur. I've been a serial entrepreneur, built a lot of companies and all of that in the past. And now I'm building something for the neurodiverse community, because this is where the biggest issues are there. We want to ignite innovation in the entrepreneurs or youngsters' mind to build solutions which can improve the quality of the neurodiverse community. That's what I'm trying to focus on. But would love to hear your feedback on any tools.
Yeah, thanks, Bharat, and kudos to you for. I love what you're working on now. I think there's a dearth of products and services that serve people who are obviously differently abled. So thank you for doing that. Yeah, no, I don't know of an end-to-end tool, and you're right, that might be an opportunity for someone. Although, again, I'll be honest and tell you, I often don't feel like the issue is tooling. More often, it's more mindset, or again, thinking philosophically. As I mentioned, even brainstorming, people typically think, oh yeah, no, we have to be physically in a room together. But that 7 to get to 1 process actually lends itself well to remote teams, because again, you do your homework, and then you come together as a meeting, and then everybody, of course, has to speak and present what they came up with. So I think there are things like that. Obviously, there are all these great practices that I'm seeing in Slack, where people can have these running rooms going that people can essentially come into and chat. But again, I don't know if the issue is as much as the tooling, and more just the mindset. And again, part of the mindset is when you have an idea, how we talk about one of the principles being open collaboration. How much are you looking to find others to help contribute to it, or versus I've got this idea, I'm just going to work in a corner by myself because it's great. And again, what we try to encourage is that look, you don't know what you don't know. And often the ideas become great because somebody else came in with something that you didn't have, which made it possible. There are all these great stories, like, for example, some of you may know about the story about the iPhone, and how, of course, the big innovation, the iPhone, was the Gorilla Glass, the screen. Well, that wasn't Apple's invention, that was Corning. And of course, that happened because somebody, I think on the Apple board, had suggested you should talk to the Corning CEO about some product that I think that they had that they didn't have an application for. So that's an example of that collaboration that happens, where an idea becomes a great idea because other people can come in and contribute to it.
Great. Do you feel metaverse can help, in accelerating this innovation within the companies?
Yeah, it might. I don't know. I hate to say this because it makes me sound like an old fogey, but I'm a little bit skeptical on the whole metaverse idea. But I'm open to it. I think it might. I mean, certainly, the more we can create, serendipity in how we interact, because I think that's the biggest challenge with remote work. When you're in a building together, I may just happen to be in the kitchen refilling my tea, and somebody walks by, and then all of a sudden we have a conversation that we would not have planned to have, but it ends up being maybe the most valuable interaction of the day. It's hard to simulate that in a remote work environment. So if the metaverse can make that happen, well, okay, I'm open to it, even if I'm a little skeptical.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Brian, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. So my question is around intellectual property. So if you give employees, free time to work on new innovation, either processes, products, etc., And let's say that they present them to the company, the organization doesn't want to commit to it or doesn't believe it falls within their portfolio. Do you see any issues with intellectual property if that employee goes and wants to pursue that outside of the organization? Has like larger companies put constraints around the employee's work that if they come up with innovations during work time, that it becomes company property essentially, or not?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. That's a really great question. And you know, what's funny is when I looked at my Intuit employment contract, it did say there very clearly that any idea I come up with while an Intuit employee belongs to Intuit. So it doesn't matter whether I presented it to them or not. But in practice, I've actually never heard of a company in Silicon Valley, you know, going after an employee when they left to say, no, that he came up with that idea when he was working for us, so that belongs to us. I don't think anybody's actually done that, and I think it would be a bad idea because that would be a company a lot of people wouldn't want to go and work for. So I haven't seen that as a practical issue, even though, as you're right, Brian, maybe technically this intellectual property belongs to the company. But you know, at the end of the day, that's usually not the issue. And what I mean by that is, you know, every company at any moment, they're fully subscribed to whatever they're doing. So when you come and present an idea, you know, the big challenge is they probably have to stop something to be able to start what you have. In fact, Eric Ries, he once said, and this was funny because he was saying if you're doing a startup, there's no point in being secretive about your idea, because a lot of people, they don't want to share the idea, or they want you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. He said, take your idea, go up and down the 101 in California to companies and show them idea and see how many of them say, oh, wow, this is great, we'll do it. And his point was that nobody, no matter what your idea is, nobody's going to try and take it from you. So the issue is usually it really is about the fact that when something is just an idea, you know, it probably is going to be too difficult to convince anyone that that idea is worth more than something that people are actually working on at that moment. But it's when something actually has proof. It's when Facebook becomes successful, or when a clubhouse becomes successful, that all of a sudden people say, oh, wow, that is a great idea, because it's had some, you know, proof in market. So what I do say, and what we talk about in the book, is that, you know, what we encourage companies to do, especially if you did start an experiment and showed promise, but the company maybe decided, no, it's not something we want to work on, is to really support this notion of allowing teams to spin out. This is something that Cisco has done in the past often, and maybe even giving this spun out company some funds to get going, and then they can raise the rest of it, with the possibility you might spin them back in later when they get traction. But it's a way to just keep that innovation going. But yeah, at the end of the day, not to worry about intellectual property, because if you're going to create a culture of innovation, people should just be freely sharing ideas and collaborating.
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Kenneth has two questions. Kenneth, do you want me to tackle those, or do you want to ask them?
No, I'll ask them. Hi, Hugh. Nice to see you again. I was part of the Centec initiative that you were leading. And that's where really my question comes from, in terms of bureaucratic organizations in highly regulated spaces, particularly in the public sector. Culture in the public sector is quite ingrained in terms of service delivery, innovation, and so forth. How have you seen the leadership ability to sustain such initiatives in such environments, and what would be your advice?
Yeah, thanks, Kenneth. Nice to hear from you again. Yeah, you know, just so people know, Centec, you know, it's a parastatal, so it's a government-owned company in South Africa. And so in many ways, they have some of the harder challenges when it comes to, you know, creating this culture of innovation. Again, with my experience working on these lean startup workshops, what I found was, people were very eager and very enthusiastic about working in this way, creating fast experiments, talking to customers. I mean, we saw this time and time again. I do think that the struggle is how to sustain it, when people go back to their day jobs. And that comes back to one of our principles about having a dedicated innovation team, because, without it, unfortunately, the inertia is a very powerful thing. We go back to our old habits, our old way of doing things. But what I found is very effective innovation leaders, they're the ones who are going to follow up with teams, nag them about, hey, what progress did you make on that idea? Or, if there's a manager maybe getting in the way, that they're there to help with the problem, maybe help negotiate, or if they need resources. There are all these things that an innovation leadership team can do to really make sure that this new way of working, this new culture can take hold.
Thank you. And I guess the second question really talks to, and I think there's Rex Williams who suggested a couple of ideas. For one of the challenges in my current role is I'm not necessarily in authority in terms of the culture of the organization, which is also quite an old entity. Now, my question there is, being in a situation where you've been exposed to such initiatives, such training and information, how does one start influencing the areas that they are responsible for, even though there's no necessarily authority, and breaking down the silos to bring in innovation at lower levels within the organization?
Yeah, it's a great question. And at the risk of sounding like I'm just shilling my book, the book really addresses this point. When Jeff and I wrote the book, we wanted to create a practical guide so that you don't need to be armed with authority. You just need passion to actually play this role as a change agent in your company. So in the book, for those of you who haven't read it, part of how the book has been written is it's a narrative, a fable about a fictional person called Patty Porter, and her story is actually based on real things that happened. But we found it was better to write it that way so that we could protect the innocent and the guilty. But part of what we did in the book is we the way we describe it, we open source a whole bunch of artifacts that make a case for you to deal with some of the objections that may come along the way. Like, how do you present to senior leadership if you're trying to make a case for, hey, I'd like to have an innovation day or a hackathon, or I'd like to suggest that we have some self-directed time for folks. So we give you all this material because it's all backed by, the good news is you're not the first in the world who's going to do this. There are tons and tons of companies that have, and there are lots of success stories. And so we present all of that to you in a way in which you can take it, make it your own, customize it to fit your needs. But yes, the story here is not that somebody has to appoint you the leader of an organization. You just have to now have the passion and the willingness to go and advocate, because it's really about how do you influence making that change, or being that change agent.
Thank you.
So check out the book.
Will do.
Great. Thank you, Kenneth. I think we have one more set of questions. Chisholm, do you want to unmute yourself? Do you want me to ask the questions for you?
Thank you, Kerry. I'll ask. Hi, Hugh. Thank you so much. This has been very helpful. So my question is particularly for small teams that are less than 10, that small. I found in the classes I've attended in the innovation management and the lessons that we've done, that most of the techniques, a lot of the examples we use are big organizations, conglomerates. But thinking about a team here that is less than 10 people, and they're really trying to find a niche in a very fast, upwardly mobile field like the media, for example, and trying to find something where they can zoom into and grow from there. So are there particular techniques or styles that are better for generating ideas in those kinds of smaller organizations or settings to make them more effective? So brainstorming, for example, is a peculiar way to do it better for the smaller ones. Then an extension to that question would be, in one of our classes, Creativity Unleashed, we learned about the Mural app, for example. So I wanted to know if there's, are there tools online, especially since we're talking about virtual, brainstorming for teams, are there tools you can suggest that would work for teams of that kind of small size? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jason, for your question. Yeah, we kind of touched on this a little bit before, but what I will start off by saying is, if you look at our book and even the book, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, which I highly recommend, you'll see a lot of the stories, even if they involve large companies, really talking about teams that have left fewer than 10 people. So I think a lot of what we're talking about actually does lend itself very well to small teams. I think the key is, are they cross-functional teams, versus, a team of just engineers or just product managers or whatever the case may be. I'll also mention, design thinking, which we touch on in the book. There are lots of techniques there that I think, again, lend themselves very well to small teams, even just two people working together. So that'd be my first response. Is I think all of this it's not actually targeted at big, large organizations per se. I think it's really small teams, whether those small teams are in startups or are small teams working in a large organization. But then, as I said earlier, I don't really have any special insights in terms of what great tools to use. In fact, there are probably others on this call who could speak more in a more educated way about that. I do, again, I'll reiterate for the brainstorming, the 7 to get to 1. Again, you can find it on my blog. Again, it's just, I've found that to be, at least in my experiences, a much better way of getting a group of people to contribute the ideas and in a way that's truly collaborative. But that's not to say that's the only way to do it, but it's certainly one way I recommend. And as I said, it does lend itself well to remote teams.
Did you say it's 7 to 1? I didn't hear.
Yeah, it's 7 to get to 1. So you make everybody on the team come up with 7 different solutions to a problem. Okay. And as I said, the first 3 or 4 usually are easy to come up with, but the last, the getting to 7 is usually hard. But that's where the gold happens, because you're forced to think out the box, and often the best ideas are the non-obvious ideas.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Great. Well, I think those are all the questions we had. Hugh, if you could stop sharing your screen, then Lindsay will share the QR codes. But I want to thank everyone so much for joining us. And I want to thank Hugh the most. Thank you for spending the time to tell us about your vast experience. There's a lot of good tips. I have notes I'm going to incorporate in my classes. So thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, great. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. And anyone who needs those QR codes, you can hang on just another minute and we'll put them up for you. All right, hope to see you at the next event soon.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Bye.
We also have a survey Lindsay just put in the chat if anyone's